In this chapter, we're going to learn about variables and data types. Before we talk about variables and data types, I would like to take a moment and recap on what we know by now. And if you look at these cards, many of these things should make sense now. You know about the main function, you know that it is the entry point of your program. You know that your program is going to be made up of statements end with a semicolon in C++. You know about functions, errors, warnings. You now have an idea about how you can handle input and output from your program. You can use comments. You know about the memory model and the execution model that we talked about in the last lecture. You know quite a lot. Now, we have been using a program like this to do things in the last chapter, but there is one thing that isn't really explained yet, and that is this int. This int is a type that is predefined in C++. And C++ predefines many types. Here we have a couple of these types for you to see as examples. Int is one of them. We have seen it a lot of times in the last chapter. It is used to represent whole numbers like 1, 2, and 3, but we have others. For example, double and float are used to represent fractional numbers. Numbers that have decimal points. For example, 2.5, 7.3, and numbers like that. And we're going to see the difference between these two. Another one that is commonly used is char or car, and it is used to represent characters in memory. And you can store in characters like A, B, C, and D, and all the other characters you can really put in. We have a bool, which is a type that is going to store two possible states. The only values you can really store in here are true or false, and we're going to see how this works. Void is somewhat confusing because it represents a typeless type, and it is really meaningful when we get to talk about functions in detail. So we're going to learn more about the void type a little later in the course. We also have the auto type, which is really not a type. It is a keyword you use in C++ to deduce other types, and we're going to see how this works later in the course. These are a few examples of types we can use in C++, and we are going to play with most of them in this chapter. Another thing I really want you to see is what does it mean to really put a for in a variable in your program. Everything you have in this program here is represented by ones and zeros in the computer's memory. It really looks like this. It's a bunch of ones and zeros in the RAM of your computer, and there must be a technique to make sense of this gibberish here and store data that makes sense to humans. And the starting point is to group these ones and zeros into little chunks that we can manipulate. Each of these ones and zeros is called a bit. So this zero here is a bit, this one here is a bit. And if we group 8 bits together, they are going to form what we call a byte. Okay, if it makes sense, you can group your bits in bytes, or if it makes sense to group them in groups of 16, you can do that like we see here. We're going to see a little more details about this in the next lecture. Okay, here you see that if you really want, you can treat each bit as a self-contained piece of data, but this is really not very useful, but there are some corner use cases for this. Okay, now we really have two sides. On the right, we have data in the format that is really convenient and understandable by humans. And on the left, we have how data is represented in memory. So there must be a way to transform between these two forms of data because humans can't really handle these ones and zeros well. And we do the transformation between these two representations of data using number systems. We have a few number systems available to us that we can use. Binary, octal, hexadecimal are a few examples, and we're going to learn about them starting in the next lecture. So go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.